And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Monday morning, we're looking at some IFR here, continuing for the Brooks Range out to the eastern Arctic coast. Better conditions south of the mountains in the central interior, and then mostly marginal VFR here across southern Alaska with some IFR, possibly from Isabel Pass down into western Prince William Sound, with areas of VFR out to the southwest coast. Bering Sea, mostly marginal, as well as the Aleutians, and a system pushing some IFR into the far western Aleutians there to about Amchitka Island. Otherwise, southeast coast, marginal VFR with areas of VFR for Prince of Wales Island. And big improvement on Monday afternoon here, back to VFR across the southeast coast, eastern interior, western interior, and marginal VFR here through the central part of the state with mostly marginal conditions there for the Arctic coast and North Slope, and not much change out west. Still some IFR now, actually retreating a little bit back to just south of the Aleutians there out west. Otherwise, marginal VFR, the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, all the way up to the Bering Strait and the Seward Peninsula. Then for Tuesday morning, marginal VFR out west, the interior looking pretty good. VFR Bristol Bay into the southwest interior, northeastward along the Yukon River area, as well as the Kuskokwim River, down into the Copper River Basin. Increase again in IFR here for the eastern Arctic coast down into the mostly the central Brooks Range there, and a little bit here over the Kobuk Valley down in toward areas just or near actually the Selawik Valley there. And southern Alaska, from about the Alaska Range or so, maybe the Kuskokwim Valley, marginal VFR, Prince William Sound, and back to marginal VFR with some areas of IFR for the southeast coast. And then for Tuesday afternoon, stays marginal for the Panhandle, marginal for the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, as well as the Gulf of Alaska. And the interior, not too bad, VFR until you get up toward the Brooks Range with some IFR there. And marginal conditions out to the Arctic coast. Out west, solid marginal VFR from the Bering Strait, covering all of the Bering Sea and just about all of the Aleutians as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Passes for tomorrow. Look for an improvement in conditions there for both Anatuvik and Adigan. Marginal VFR at times for both locations. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal, and occasionally marginal for Rainy as well. Windy, improving, starting out marginal, becoming VFR, probably by late morning through the afternoon. And Isabel, same pattern, lower conditions earlier on, and then good VFR later in the day. Mentasta, VFR, Tanita, VFR, as well as Portage, marginal VFR. Chilkoot and White, back to VFR. And for the freezing levels, 2,000 feet here, Kodiak Island up into the Kenai Peninsula, western Brooks Range, and then 2,000 to 4,000 feet here over the eastern interior areas. And moving on to icing. Considerable moderate rime icing here, Cook Inlet right up through the central interior, kind of diminishing there north of the Yukon River, and then ending at the Brooks Range. From there, looking at the jet stream, south to southeast flow 60 knots there for the eastern interior and up around the eastern Arctic coast. Otherwise, westerlies at about 65 knots blowing across the Alaska Peninsula with the main jet well to the south. 9,000 foot wind flow showing low pressure here off the Yukon Delta coast. Only 25 knot winds blowing around that thing. In Alaska here, Russia has it up to about 40 knots out of the northeast, southeast 35 knots there across the Yukon Flats. Light variable winds, southern Alaska into the Panhandle as well as the Gulf, and not too bad out over the Aleutians, northwest 30 knots there, Adak and Atka. And coming down to 3,000 feet, light winds across the Alaska Peninsula, Aleutians, all of the Bering Sea, and still a little brisk up here along the western Arctic coast, northeast 30 knots, pick up to about 50 knots near the Bering Strait, and then drop off as you get down toward Nunivak Island to about 20 knots or so. Otherwise, pretty light winds elsewhere around the state. So moving on to turbulence, we'll look at possible considerable moderate turbulence here, roughly about Point Lay, Cape Lisburne, and Point Hope in the Lisburne Hills. Otherwise, light to isolated moderate turbulence down to about St. Lawrence Island, and then back up toward Wainwright.